There are places where silence doesn't just exist, it watches. And when you're truly alone, working in a building that remembers everything, you start to wonder if you were ever really alone at all. This is the story of a man who heard something he was never meant to hear, and what whispered back changed everything. If you've ever worked alone at night, you know the kind of silence that starts to feel alive, the kind that presses against your eardrums until you're almost begging for any sound at all. Tonight's story comes from one of our viewers. Like all the accounts we share on this channel, it's allegedly true. We've changed names and certain identifying details to protect privacy, but the experience? That remains untouched. This is Story 1. The First Floor Whisper. Aaron Martinez was 27 years old when this happened. He'd been working as a night janitor for almost 2 years at the Whitmore Building in Columbus, Ohio. It was one of those stubborn structures from the 1950s, 5 stories of oak paneling, frosted glass office doors, and hallways that seemed to stretch longer than they should. The kind of building that smelled like old paper and floor wax no matter how much you cleaned it. Aaron worked the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., completely alone, except for Victor, the security guard who spent most of his time in the basement watching football highlights on his phone. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave Aaron time to think. He liked the quiet, at least he used to. The Whitmore Building had a presence about it after midnight. Lights buzzed in that electric insect way. The walls creaked like someone shifting their weight, and the portraits in the lobby, old black and white photos of the building's founders, seemed to follow you with their eyes if you looked too long. Aaron had learned to ignore all of it. But there are some things you can't ignore forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It started on a Tuesday in late October. Aaron was mopping the first floor hallway just past midnight when one of the overhead fluorescent lights began to flicker. Not unusual. Old building. Old wiring. But then it popped, loud as a gunshot, and the bulb went dark. The hallway plunged into shadow except for the dim glow from the exit sign at the far end. And then, the air conditioning stopped. Just like that. Total silence. Aaron stood there gripping his mop, listening to his own heartbeat. That's when he heard it. A whisper, right next to his ear, close enough that he felt the breath. "Help me." He spun around so fast he almost slipped on the wet floor. Nothing. No one. The hallway stretched out empty in both directions. Every office door was closed, locked from the outside like always. He checked. Twice. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but dust motes and peeling paint. He tried to laugh it off, told himself it was the pipes, or maybe the wind coming through a vent. But deep down, Aaron knew what he heard, and he knew it wasn't mechanical. He finished mopping quickly after that, keeping his head down and his music loud in his earbuds. But as he turned the corner toward the stairwell, something caught his eye. A door. The darkroom door. It was open, just slightly, maybe 6 inches, enough to see a sliver of blackness inside. Aaron stopped. That door had been sealed shut for as long as he'd worked there. Victor told him once that it used to be a photography lab back when the building was new, but it had been locked up decades ago after some kind of accident. No one ever talked about what kind of accident. And yet, there it was. Open. Aaron approached slowly, the wet mop still dripping in his hand. He used the handle to push the door wider. It creaked on rusted hinges. The smell hit him first. Sharp, chemical, like ammonia mixed with something rotten. Then came the cold. The air inside was at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. He stepped in, phone light raised. The room was narrow and deep, lined with metal shelves covered in dust, old bottles with faded labels, developing trays stacked haphazardly, film canisters scattered across the floor. But in the center of the room, sitting on a waist-high table, was a single black tray, and it was filled with liquid. Dark, still liquid. Not dusty, not dry. Fresh. Aaron moved closer, his breath fogging in the cold. He shined his flashlight directly over the tray. The surface of the liquid was perfectly smooth, almost mirror-like. And then he saw it, a face, reflected in the black. Not his, someone else's. Pale, mouth open, eyes wide. He jerked back, stumbling into the shelves behind him. Bottles rattled. When he looked again, the face was gone. Just his own reflection staring back at him, distorted and wrong. Then came the sound. A metallic clang from the back of the room, like something heavy being dropped. Aaron's throat tightened. "Hello?" His voice cracked. No answer. But something moved. A shadow, tall and thin, slipping between the shelves near the far wall. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was dry. "Victor, is that you?" Nothing. The shadow was gone. But now the whispers were back. Faint at first, then louder. Overlapping. Different voices. Male, female, young, old. All of them saying the same thing. "Help me. Help me. Help me." Aaron's instincts screamed at him to leave, but his feet wouldn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the black tray as the voices grew louder, more insistent. The air grew colder still. His breath came out in thick clouds. The floor beneath his shoes felt sticky, like someone had spilled syrup. He looked down. Old photo paper, dozens of sheets scattered everywhere, curling at the edges. But one caught his eye. It was lying face up near his foot, and on it, pressed into the emulsion like it had been burned there, were handprints. Small handprints, like a child's. He bent down to pick it up, and the whispering stopped. All at once. Complete silence. Then, from inside the black tray, a sound. Tap, 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 like fingernails drumming on metal. Aaron's flashlight beam swung toward the tray. The liquid was rippling now, slow concentric circles spreading out from the center. Something was underneath. He could see the shape of it. Fingers, breaking the surface. His flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed him whole, and in that darkness, he heard breathing. Heavy. Wet. Right behind him. Something cold touched his arm. Not like a hand, like ice water spreading across his skin. Aaron screamed and bolted for the door. He slammed into the frame, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't move. He yanked harder, panic flooding his chest. The door was jammed, or locked, or held, from the inside. Behind him, the breathing grew louder. He could feel it on the back of his neck. He threw his shoulder into the door. Once, twice. On the third hit, it burst open, and he stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The lights were flickering now, one by one down the entire length of the corridor. On, off, on, off. Like something was moving through them. And then he saw it. Black liquid, seeping out from under the darkroom door, spreading across the tile floor in thin, creeping tendrils. Aaron didn't wait. He ran, sprinted down the hallway, his shoes slipping on the wet floor, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't stop until he hit the lobby. Victor was sitting at the front desk, headphones in, completely oblivious. Aaron grabbed him by the shoulder, nearly shouting, "We need to go back. Now. Something's in the darkroom." Victor pulled out his earbuds, confused. "What are you talking about?" Aaron dragged him down the hallway, explaining everything in frantic bursts. The whispers, the tray, the shadow, the liquid. But when they reached the first floor, the hallway was clean, dry. The lights were working perfectly, and the darkroom door was closed. Victor tried the handle, locked. He pulled out his master key and opened it. The room was empty, dusty, untouched. No tray, no liquid, no shelves knocked over. Just an old, forgotten space that smelled faintly of mildew. Aaron stood in the doorway, staring. "It was here. I swear it was here." Victor put a hand on his shoulder. "You've been working too many nights, man. Get some rest." But as they turned to leave, Aaron saw it. On the inside of the door. A single handprint. Black. Smudged. Still wet. Victor saw it too. Neither of them said a word. They closed the door, locked it, and agreed never to mention it in any report. Aaron kept working at the Whitmore Building, but he never went near the first floor alone again. He'd catch that same chemical smell sometimes, drifting through the vents late at night. And once, while vacuuming the third floor, he heard it again. That whisper. Faint. Distant. Help me. He didn't stop to listen. A week later, the building's pipes burst on the first floor. Maintenance was called in to assess the damage. When they pulled up the tiles near the darkroom, they found something that wasn't on any blueprint. An old drain, rusted metal, and beneath it, a buried sink, the kind used in photography labs. When they opened the pipe, black sludge poured out, thick, foul-smelling. The workers refused to go back inside until it was cleaned. Aaron put in his 2 weeks' notice the next day. He didn't explain why. Didn't need to. Victor understood. Some places hold on to things. Memories. Pain. Secrets. And sometimes, those things don't want to stay buried. Aaron doesn't work nights anymore. He took a day job at a warehouse across town, brighter, louder, full of people. But even now, months later, when his apartment goes quiet late at night, he hears it. That whisper, faint, just at the edge of hearing. And sometimes when he's alone in the bathroom and the mirror fogs up from the shower, he sees something in the condensation. A handprint, small, pressed against the glass from the other side. He never speaks about it out loud. He's afraid that if he does, something might answer back. Because some things don't want help. They want company. And once they know you can hear them, they never really let you go. If this story made you feel something, let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that still stays with you? We want to hear your story. And remember, the next time you're alone in a quiet place, listen carefully. You might not be as alone as you think. There are some places where silence isn't empty. Miguel learned that the hard way when he saw his own face staring back at him from a bucket of water, except he wasn't the one smiling. What he found in the basement of that old Michigan school didn't just make him quit his job. It made him question whether reflections are really just images, or if sometimes they're windows into something that's been waiting on the other side, watching us all along. Our next story was sent in by a janitor who swore he'd never work another night shift again after what he saw in one of the oldest schools in Michigan. It started as a quiet job cleaning classrooms until something in the reflection started watching back. Miguel Rodriguez was 35 years old when he took the custodial position at Riverside Middle School, a historic building that had been educating kids since 1908. The pay was decent, the work was straightforward, and most importantly, he didn't have to deal with people. His shift ran from 4 in the afternoon until midnight, and after 9 o'clock, he was usually the only person left in the building. The hallways would go quiet, the fluorescent lights would hum their steady drone, and Miguel would move from room to room with his cart, mopping floors and emptying trash bins. He'd heard the stories from other custodians about the haunted hallway on the second floor, about the science lab where equipment would move on its own, about the basement where you could hear children laughing when no one was there. Miguel didn't believe any of it. He'd laugh it off during break room conversations, shake his head at the superstitions, and get back to work. The building was old, sure. The pipes knocked, the wood floors creaked, the windows rattled when trucks passed by outside. That was all it was, old building noises, nothing more. The school itself had that particular smell that all old institutions carry, a mixture of floor wax, chalk dust, and something faintly metallic that seemed to seep from the radiators. The hallways stretched long and dark after hours, lined with trophy cases that reflected the overhead lights in warped, distorted patterns. Classroom doors had frosted glass panels that glowed amber when he passed with his cart. The basement was the worst part of the building. a maze of storage rooms and mechanical spaces with cracked tiles and exposed pipes that groaned and hissed at random intervals. Most custodians avoided going down there unless absolutely necessary. Miguel didn't mind it. He actually preferred the solitude. Down there, he could work in peace, away from the flickering hallway lights and the occasional motion sensor that would trip for no reason. At least, that's what he told himself before everything changed. It was a Tuesday night in late September when Miguel first noticed something wrong with his reflection. He was mopping the science wing, working his way down the hall in the methodical pattern he'd developed over 6 months on the job. The mop bucket sat on his cart, filled with soapy water that sloshed gently as he pushed it forward. Around 10:15, he paused to wring out the mop, and that's when he saw it. His reflection in the water wasn't moving quite right. He lifted the mop and his reflection lifted it too, but there was a delay, like watching a video with the audio out of sync. Just a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. Miguel froze, staring down into the bucket. The reflection stared back, perfectly still now, even though he was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He blinked. The reflection blinked. He moved his hand. The reflection didn't. For maybe 5 seconds they stood there, Miguel and his reflection, two separate entities occupying the same space but not quite connected anymore. Then Miguel shook his head, splashed the water with his hand, and the image broke apart into ripples. When it settled, everything looked normal again. He blamed exhaustion. He'd been pulling extra shifts to cover for a coworker who'd quit suddenly. Too many late nights, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. That had to be it. He dumped the bucket into the floor drain, refilled it, and kept working. But when he glanced back at the cart 20 minutes later, he could swear the water was perfectly still, unnaturally so, like glass. And in that glass, something was watching. The next few nights brought small disturbances that Miguel tried to rationalize away. The lights in the science wing would flicker when he entered, a rapid strobing that lasted just long enough to make him pause before returning to normal. He'd hear footsteps, the distinctive squeak of rubber sneakers on linoleum, coming from the far end of the hallway. But when he'd turn to look, every classroom door would be closed, every hallway empty. One night he set his mop bucket down to unlock a supply closet, and when he turned back, the bucket had tipped slightly to one side. Not enough to spill, just enough to slosh water over the rim. There was no draft, no vibration from the pipes, nothing that should have moved it. He heard something then so faint he almost missed it. A sound like water dripping, but with a rhythm that sounded almost like speech. He stood there in the empty hallway, listening, his heart beating faster than it should have been for such a small thing. The sound stopped. Miguel picked up the bucket, set it firmly on the cart, and kept working. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something in the building had changed, or maybe that something had noticed him for the first time. That was the first time he felt the school looking back at him. Not watching exactly. Looking. There's a difference. When someone watches you, you can feel their eyes, their attention. This was different. This felt like the building itself had turned its attention toward him, the way you might glance at an insect crawling across your arm before deciding what to do with it. Miguel started working faster after that, moving through his checklist with mechanical efficiency. He stopped looking too closely at reflective surfaces, avoided making eye contact with windows and glass trophy cases. He told himself he was being paranoid, that the old building was getting into his head the way it had gotten into the heads of every other superstitious custodian who'd worked there. But deep down, in that primal part of the brain that knows when something is wrong, Miguel understood that whatever was happening wasn't in his head at all. Over the following week, the reflections became impossible to ignore. It started with the mop bucket again. Miguel would be working, pushing the cart down a hallway, and he'd catch a glimpse of the water's surface. Instead of showing the ceiling above him, it would show something else. A different room. A classroom with the chairs arranged in a circle instead of rows. A chalkboard covered in handwriting that wasn't there when he looked at the actual board. Once, he saw lockers in the reflection that the school hadn't used in decades, old green metal ones that had been removed and replaced with modern blue ones years before he'd even started working there. The water was showing him the building as it used to be, or maybe as it still was in some other layer of reality that existed parallel to his own. Miguel started avoiding the bucket's surface, keeping his eyes on the floor as he worked, but that only made things worse because he couldn't see when the reflections changed. Then came the night he saw the face. He was cleaning the first-floor hallway near the main office when he bent down to wring out the mop. The water was dark and murky from dirty floors, but clear enough to show his reflection. Except this time, there was something else. Behind his reflected shoulder, floating in the water like it was submerged just beneath the surface, was a child's face. Pale, almost translucent. Mouth hanging open in a silent scream or maybe a gasp. Eyes wide and dark, pupils dilated so much they looked entirely black. The face wasn't solid. It rippled and wavered like it was made of smoke, but the features were distinct enough to make out. A boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old. Miguel spun around so fast he nearly knocked over the bucket. The hallway behind him was empty, just closed classroom doors and the red glow of the exit sign at the far end. He turned back to the bucket. The face was gone. Only his own reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, mouth slightly open in an expression that matched the child's too closely for comfort. After that night, Miguel changed his routine. He started dumping the mop water more frequently, refilling the bucket every 15 minutes whether it needed it or not. He avoided filling it too full, reasoning that less water meant less surface area for reflections to form. He worked with his back to the cart whenever possible, but it didn't matter. The building had found a way to reach him, and it wasn't going to stop just because he tried to avoid looking. Reflections appeared in windows, in the polished surface of the trophy cases, in the dark screens of computers left on desks. Sometimes he'd see movement in his peripheral vision, turn to look, and find his own reflection gesturing at him from a glass door, waving slowly like it was trying to get his attention. The worst part was the feeling that came with these sightings. Not fear exactly, though there was plenty of that. It was more like recognition, like whatever was showing itself to him, knew him personally, had been waiting specifically for him, and was glad he'd finally noticed. Friday evening, October 13th. Miguel would remember the date for the rest of his life. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, caught him in the main hallway just as he was starting his shift. She needed a favor. The basement hallway, the one that ran along the old boiler room, hadn't been properly cleaned in years. There'd been a minor water leak the week before, nothing serious, but maintenance had fixed it, and now the area needed a deep clean before the school board inspection on Monday. She asked if Miguel could handle it tonight. He almost said no. Something in his gut told him to refuse, to claim he had too much other work, to suggest literally anyone else for the job. But Mrs. Henderson was a nice woman who'd given him this job when he desperately needed it, and he wasn't about to let her down over some superstitious anxiety. He agreed. She thanked him, patted his shoulder, and left him standing there in the empty hallway, already regretting his decision. The basement stairs descended from the north end of the building, behind a heavy metal door that always stuck in its frame. Miguel had to put his shoulder into it to get it open. The stairwell beyond was narrow and poorly lit, illuminated by a single bare bulb that cast more shadows than it eliminated. The concrete steps were worn smooth in the center from decades of foot traffic. The temperature dropped noticeably as he descended, and the air took on that distinctive underground smell, damp concrete and rust and something organic that might have been mold or might have been older than that. At the bottom, another door opened into the basement hallway, a long corridor with exposed pipes running along the ceiling and old tiles that had cracked and lifted over the years. The boiler room hummed somewhere to his left, a deep mechanical throb that you could feel through the floor. To his right, the hallway stretched into darkness, punctuated by weak emergency lights mounted near the ceiling every 20 feet or so. Miguel wheeled his cart to the maintenance closet and looked for a spigot to fill his bucket. The closest one was attached to a wall near the boiler room, an old brass fixture crusted with mineral deposits. When he turned the handle, the pipes groaned, and the water came out brown, thick with sediment. He let it run for a minute, watching it gradually clear from rust-colored to cloudy to finally, mostly transparent. He filled the bucket, added cleaning solution, and began working his way down the hallway. The basement was quiet in a way that felt oppressive, like the silence had weight to it. The boiler's hum provided a constant background noise, but somehow that only made the silence worse when he moved far enough away that the sound faded. His cartwheel squeaked, his footsteps echoed, and the mop made wet, slapping sounds against the tile. Those were the only sounds. No voices from upstairs, no traffic from outside. Nothing. Just Miguel and the darkness and whatever else might be down there with him. He was halfway down the hall when he noticed the bucket's reflection. He'd been avoiding looking at it, keeping his eyes on the floor and the walls, but something made him glance down. The water surface was perfectly still, not even rippling from the cart's movement. That shouldn't have been possible. The cart was rolling over uneven tiles, jarring and bumping, but the water remained smooth as a mirror, and in that mirror he saw something that made his blood go cold. A handprint. Pale, small, the size of a child's hand. Pressed against the inside surface of the water, fingers spread wide, like someone was reaching up from underneath. The print wasn't distorted by ripples or bubbles, it was clear and sharp and impossible. Miguel stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The cart stayed where it was. The handprint remained, perfectly visible, perfectly still. Then the water began to ripple outward from the center, slow, concentric circles that shouldn't have formed without something disturbing the surface. When the ripples faded, the handprint was gone. Instead, Miguel saw his own reflection, only it was smiling. A wide, unnatural smile that pulled at the corners of its mouth in a way that looked painful. Miguel wasn't smiling. His mouth was open in shock, his face pale. But the reflection grinned back at him like it was enjoying a joke he wasn't part of yet. Miguel stood frozen, unable to look away from the grinning reflection. His mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation, coming up empty. Then the bucket moved, not tipped by wind or vibration or any natural cause. It simply moved, rolling forward on the cart like someone had pushed it, water sloshing inside but not spilling. The cart wheels squeaked across the tile, moving toward him. Miguel backed away, his heel hitting the wall behind him. The cart kept coming, slow but deliberate, until it stopped about 3 feet in front of him. The water inside had gone completely still again. The overhead light bulb directly above him popped with a sharp crack, showering him with tiny fragments of glass. The hallway plunged into deeper darkness, lit now only by the distant emergency lights. Miguel fumbled for his flashlight, hands shaking, finally getting it free from his belt. He clicked it on. The beam was weak, flickering, the batteries apparently dying despite being fresh that morning. He swept the light across the hallway, and that's when he saw the shadow. On the wall to his left, cast by no visible object, was the distinct silhouette of a child. Small, crouched low, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The shadow was darker than it should have been, somehow more solid than the surrounding darkness. Miguel spun around, shining his light into the space behind him. Nothing there, just empty hallway. When he turned back, the shadow had moved. It was closer now, shifted several feet down the wall, still crouched, still watching. The flashlight flickered again, dimming almost to nothing before surging back to life. Miguel's breath came in short, quick gasps. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears, drowning out even the boiler's hum. He looked down at the bucket and his reflection was still there, still grinning, but now it was doing something worse. It was reaching. The reflected hand was extending upward through the water's surface, fingers stretching toward the real Miguel, close enough that he could see the details of the skin, the lines on the palm, the dirt under the nails. Then he heard it. A voice. Quiet, barely more than a whisper, but clear enough to understand. The voice of a child, young and afraid and angry all at once. It came from the bucket, from the reflection, from the water itself. 3 words that Miguel would hear in his nightmares for years afterward. Don't leave me. The voice cracked on the last word, dissolving into a wet, gurgling sound like someone drowning. Miguel staggered backward, hitting the wall again, and the voice came again, louder, more insistent, overlapping with itself like multiple children speaking at once. Don't leave me here, don't leave me here, don't leave me. The temperature dropped so suddenly that Miguel's breath came out in visible puffs. Frost began forming on the pipes above him, spreading like crystalline fingers. The emergency lights flickered. The bucket tipped. It happened fast. The bucket overturned violently, wrenched sideways by some invisible force, and the water spilled across the tile floor in a surge that should have spread out in every direction. Instead, it pooled together, holding its shape, forming a perfect circle of liquid that reflected the ceiling lights with mirror-like precision. Miguel watched, paralyzed, as something began to emerge from that impossible puddle. First the fingers, long and pale and dripping, then the hand, the wrist, the arm. A figure was pulling itself up through the reflection like it was climbing through a hole in reality. The head emerged next, featureless and smooth, covered entirely by long, dark hair that hung down in wet strands. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just blank, slick skin and that hair, plastered flat like it had been underwater for a very long time. The figure dragged itself up, and Miguel could see it wasn't solid. It was translucent, made of something between water and shadow, but substantial enough that when its hand slapped against the tile floor, he could hear the wet impact. The figure pulled itself halfway out of the puddle, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by someone who didn't quite know how bodies worked. Then it stopped, suspended there, half in and half out of the reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. Miguel stood pressed against the wall, flashlight dangling forgotten from his hand, unable to move or scream or do anything but stare. The figure's head tilted slowly to one side, hair sliding away to reveal what was underneath. Still no face, just smooth, wet, nothing. Then the figure collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. It lost cohesion all at once, dissolving into a puddle of thick black liquid that spread across the floor in reaching tendrils. The substance wasn't water anymore. It was thicker, more viscous, and it moved with purpose, spreading toward Miguel's feet like it was searching for him. The lights went out completely. Every emergency light, every distant glow, everything. The basement was plunged into absolute darkness, the kind that presses against your eyes and makes you question if they're even open. Miguel ran. He didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just moved on pure instinct. He could hear his feet splashing through liquid, could feel it soaking through his shoes, cold and thick and wrong. Behind him, other footsteps. Wet, slapping footsteps that matched his pace, that got closer with each stride no matter how fast he ran. He couldn't see anything. Didn't know if he was running toward the stairs or deeper into the basement, but he kept going anyway because stopping meant letting whatever was behind him catch up. His hand hit a wall, scraped along concrete, found the edge of a door frame. He pulled himself through, grabbed the door, slammed it shut. The impact echoed through the darkness. The footsteps stopped. Miguel stood there, panting, his back pressed against the door, waiting, listening. The silence stretched on. Then, from the other side of the door, right next to his ear, came a sound. The sound of small hands pressing against wood, fingernails scratching, and that voice again, multiple voices, children's voices all speaking together. Why did you leave us here? Miguel didn't remember climbing the stairs. His next clear memory was stumbling out of the north entrance of the school into the parking lot, gasping for air like he'd been underwater. His clothes were soaked, not just with cleaning water, but with that thick black substance. It covered his shoes, his pants up to the knees, his hands. In the light of the parking lot lamps, it looked like oil, but it smelled like stagnant water and something else, something organic and rotten. He went home, showered 3 times, and called in sick for the weekend. On Monday, he met with Mrs. Henderson and told her he'd had an anxiety attack in the basement, that the space was too isolated, that he couldn't work nights anymore. She was understanding, sympathetic even, though he could tell she didn't entirely believe him. She said she'd look into moving him to a day shift position, but it might take a few weeks to arrange. Miguel thanked her and went back to work that night, telling himself he could handle it for a few more weeks. He couldn't. The custodial closet on the first floor started smelling like stagnant water within days. Not constantly, but in waves, like something was breathing inside it. Other custodians commented on it, made jokes about dead rats in the walls, but Miguel knew better. He avoided that closet whenever possible, storing his equipment in the main office instead. Then, the complaint started. Janitors on the night shift reported that their cleaning water would turn black after 10 o'clock, no matter how many times they changed it. The water would come out clear from the tap, but within minutes of being in the bucket, it would darken to an oily black. One janitor, a woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 12 years, quit after she saw what she described as a child's reflection in the mop sink. She'd been emptying her bucket when she looked down and saw a boy's face staring up at her from the drain. She didn't come back after that night, didn't even return to collect her final paycheck. Just left her keys in the office mailbox and never answered when they called. Miguel requested a transfer to the day shift with more urgency. He explained that he had family obligations, that the night schedule was affecting his health, that he'd take any position available even if it meant a pay cut. Mrs. Henderson finally agreed, and 3 weeks after the basement incident, Miguel started working 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. He was relieved, grateful even, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The building knew him now. It had his attention, and whatever lived in those reflections, whatever had tried to pull itself out of that puddle in the basement, wasn't going to forget about him just because he changed shifts. 4 months passed. Miguel settled into the day shift routine, appreciating the presence of students and teachers, the noise and activity that filled the hallways. The building felt different during the day, less oppressive, more like what it was supposed to be, just an old school with old school problems. He started to relax to convince himself that whatever had happened in the basement was an isolated incident, maybe even a stress-induced hallucination. He went back to not believing in ghosts. Then he had to return to pick up his final paycheck. The school had switched to direct deposit, but there'd been some administrative error with his bank information, and his last check had been cut as a physical paper check instead. Mrs. Henderson called and asked if he could come by to pick it up. Miguel agreed, figuring he'd go in during the day, grab the check from the office, and be in and out in 10 minutes. He arrived at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. The hallways were full of students heading to their last period classes. Everything felt normal, safe, completely ordinary. He picked up the check from the front desk, chatted briefly with the secretary, and headed back toward the north exit. That's when he passed the custodial closet, the one that had smelled like stagnant water. The door was slightly open, just a few inches, and from inside came a sound, water dripping. Miguel knew he should keep walking. Every instinct told him to leave, to get out of the building and never come back. But something made him stop. Curiosity, maybe, or that strange compulsion people have to look at things they know will disturb them. He pushed the door open wider. The closet was small, just 8 feet by 6 feet, lined with metal shelves holding supplies. In the corner, sitting on the floor, was a mop bucket. It was filled with water, dark and still, the surface reflecting the single overhead light. Miguel stared at that bucket, and even before he looked into it, he knew what he'd see. His own reflection, smiling. The same unnatural grin, the corners of the mouth pulled too wide, teeth showing in a way that looked more like a threat than an expression of joy. The reflection's hand moved, lifting slowly, fingers curling in a small wave. Goodbye, or maybe see you soon. Miguel backed away from the closet, his heart racing. The door swung shut on its own with a soft click. He stood there in the hallway, surrounded by the noise of students and teachers, the normal sounds of a normal school day, and realized that whatever was in that building, it hadn't forgotten him at all. It had just been waiting. He turned and walked out of the school, got in his car, and drove away. He never went back. Not to pick up paperwork, not to say goodbye to colleagues, not for anything. He found a new job within 2 weeks, working maintenance at a grocery store, and he never took another position in a school building again. But sometimes, when he's washing his hands or filling a glass with water, he catches a glimpse of his reflection and notices it's not moving quite right, just slightly off, like there's a delay. And in those moments, Miguel remembers the basement, and the puddle, and the figure that tried to climb out. And he wonders if it ever really let him go, or if it's just waiting for the right moment to try again. Miguel doesn't talk about it anymore, but he said something that stuck with me. He told me that the scariest things don't live in the dark. They live in reflections, in the spaces between what we see and what's actually there. And he said that whenever you look into still water, you should ask yourself a question. Are you looking down into the water, or is something looking up at you? How would you feel if you were in Miguel's position? Would you keep working that job? Would you have gone into that basement at all? Think about that the next time you see your reflection, and it doesn't quite match what you're doing. Think about what might be on the other side, watching you, waiting for you to look away. Because Miguel learned something in that basement. Some mirrors don't just reflect. They connect. And once you've made that connection, once something on the other side has seen you and recognized you, it never really lets go. Thank you for watching. If this story affected you, if it made you think twice about reflections or basements or old buildings that seem to remember things they shouldn't, let us know in the comments. And if you have a story of your own, something that happened to you that you can't explain, we want to hear it. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, not everything that looks like you is you.